What's up guys, this is Kincade and welcome to episode 5 of the 2003 Suzuki RM125 build. To start off today's episode, I'm going to get the swing arm ready to go. That will involve installing brand new Pro X swing arm bearings that I just pulled out of the freezer, as well as the rest of the swing arm hardware. Now some of the original swing arm parts I just polished up, but those that I can replace with new fast metric hardware I am. I also got the chain slider cleaned up pretty nicely, looking pretty good. And this is ready to go as well. It's not quite worn out, so we'll get some use out of it before eventually replacing this piece. Just pulled this Pro X swing arm bearing kit out of the freezer. They should install into the swing arm nice and easy. It is Monday night, about 9:30 p.m., the last day of February. Tonight, I'm going to continue making progress assembling the bottom end of this engine. Today is Friday, March 3rd, and it's time to resume making some progress on this engine. I realized when I was working on this a few days ago that there's just a few more pieces I need, and I got them all ordered, and they should be here on Monday. For this side of the engine, I'm just waiting on the snap ring for right here. The original one had a little bit of a bend to it, and it's always better to be safe than sorry here and replace those. I also realized that the Kickstarter I have does not actually have the shaft attachment, which is an issue, so I've been trying to track one of those down on eBay. This has a little bite out of it, but I think those splines should still be okay. If that's an issue, then I'll end up having to replace the entire Kickstarter assembly, or at least just the shaft. But what I'm going to do right now is get this brand new Wiseco clutch basket prepared for installation. These Wiseco baskets are made in the USA. They are forged instead of cast, which has a lot of benefits you can read about in a really detailed blog post they have. They're hard anodized and Teflon coated, which essentially makes the clutch perform better and makes these baskets last way longer than OEMs. So I'm really excited to be running one of these on this bike. This should really help improve performance and the life of the clutch. Now, the basket comes with assembly instructions, a bit, and pre-Loctited screws, which is super nice. Again, if you take a look at the OEM basket, it is very notched, so definitely time for a replacement. Now, if you look at both baskets, the parts I will be reusing are this gear as well as this gear. So Wiseco also has a very detailed video on this exact process. I will link that video that Wiseco has on this exact process on screen and down below in the description. Well, I'm worried that my Dremel might have just died. It still works, but the lock button no longer works. It just spins and I cannot get the bit out. So I just went to Ace Hardware and bought two new tools. The first one being this new Dremel 4300. I've had this Dremel 3000 for I think about 7 years now and can't even fathom how many hours this thing has run. And there have been a handful of instances where I feel it's a little underpowered. So while I didn't really want to go buy a new Dremel, and this one's very likely fixable if I take it apart, after this amount of time and the fact that I do want a little more power out of my Dremel, I decided it was time for an upgrade, so this thing should be really awesome. I also love that it has a keyless chuck. I'm constantly switching Dremel bits, so this alone was almost a big enough deal for me to be like, all right, this is going to be really nice to have. And then the second thing I bought was an angle grinder. This one was only 35 bucks, nothing special, just 6 amp, 4.5 inch small angle grinder. But there have been a handful of instances over the years where I've wanted one of these and haven't had one, and I've had to make do with something else. Obviously, I do have the bench grinder, but having this will be super convenient. With this clutch basket here, Wiseco recommends drilling it out with a drill press is their top recommendation. I don't have a drill press. Their next recommendation is using an angle grinder, which I also didn't have. So I was using the Dremel, which was working fine. As you can see here, I've got through 5 of them, no problem. These ones I drilled all the way through, and then I realized I can get away with just drilling a little bit and then grinding the rest off. And then this is where I got to when the Dremel 3000 broke. I think I'm gonna go ahead and try and finish this off with the angle grinder now that I have it. But just to note, the Dremel was taking care of these just fine. So if you're doing this at home and don't have the proper tools, you can drill it out just a little bit with a standard drill and then use the Dremel to grind the rest of the material away. But I'm gonna go ahead and try and get this wrapped up now. Okay, I have the gear all cleaned up and all the parts ready to go to get this new clutch basket assembled. This instruction booklet for the Wiseco clutch basket has diagrams for all different styles of clutch basket. Mine matches this one, and it says to torque these bolts to 6.6 foot-pounds. Now the final step in this basket assembly is just to peen over the edges of the screws, and this just ensures that they cannot loosen up. There we have it, fresh Wiseco clutch basket, ready to install. Finished up a great weekend of playing hockey and riding my KTM in 30-degree weather. Ready for a productive Monday evening in the shop. I've not yet got all the parts to finish the bottom end. They should be here tomorrow. I think there was a slight shipping delay, but I did receive this bearing, which is the only piece I was waiting for to finish the ignition side of the engine. So on this bike, there's a roller bearing that goes in here along with a seal, and that is where the clutch push rod goes all the way through here. This is where the clutch cable installs and hooks onto this piece right here. This has a notch in it and it rotates when the clutch cable is pulled in order to push the clutch rod out. So I just ran into a problem. I'm spinning the crank here just to make sure everything moves the way it should. And if you watch closely, you can really see it right here. The crank has a side-to-side wobble. Now if you look in here while I spin it as well, this is probably much harder to tell, but you can see the side-to-side clearance changes ever so slightly as well. Now this is not something I have experienced on any of the engines I have built, although when this thing's spinning at 10,000 RPM, I can imagine that a wobble like that is probably going to cause some pretty nasty things to happen. To be completely honest with you, I don't entirely know the next step. In the meantime, there is still plenty to be done on the bike that doesn't involve the engine. Of course, to really start getting the chassis assembled, the engine will be the first thing in, but I have a lot of other parts that can be prepped and I can still keep making progress so that once this engine is done, the whole thing will come together quickly. That is where I'm at with the engine right now though. Maybe it's good that those other components didn't get here today because I might have had the whole clutch on and everything before having this realization. Unfortunately, no matter what I end up doing to solve it, step one is splitting the cases again. Well, excuse the mess on the workbench, but here is the crankshaft once again by its lonesome on the bench. And here is a disassembled engine. As frustrating as it is to go backwards in your progress, that literally only took me a half hour and will take about that long to go back together. Gives me time to focus on the other parts of the bike that need to get done that I've been neglecting. Okay, I have an update on the engine and the plan moving forward. It's been a long day. I was up till about 2:30 yesterday working in the garage, working on the bike, getting stuff organized, trying to diagnose the engine. I spoke with Rod over at Millennium Technologies on the phone this morning, discussing the issues that I was experiencing, showed him a video of that crank wobble. He sent me over the measurements that the crank left their facility with and assured me that it was true when it left Millennium, and maybe somehow I got it out of true, but more than likely it's another issue. Now we started talking about the case, the bearings, how the installation went. Rod had this sneaking suspicion that it's a case/bearing issue rather than a crankshaft issue. Now if you remember, when I installed this crankcase bearing, it dropped right into the case. I did heat the case half in the oven and freeze the bearing, and it dropped right in. Now, I assumed that was okay because that's pretty standard with transmission bearings, and that happens pretty often. Rod clarified that with crankcase bearings specifically, that is not okay. They should require at least a little bit of force to install, as the clearance should be tighter. So he believes that since the spot where the bearing sits was slightly bored out, that is causing the crank wobble. The bearing just isn't centered quite perfectly, and the effect of that is obviously magnified with the crankshaft installed. So this repair is a little bit outside my wheelhouse. So assuming there is an issue with the case and the bearing, Rod is going to work some magic on this to make sure that the bearing is perfectly centered, seated, and won't have any issues moving forward. And since I'm sending both case halves and the crankshaft back out, Rod suggested, you know what, I might as well send out the transmission as well and get this micro polished. He said that I'm not going to believe the difference it makes in the smoothness of the transmission and the way the bike shifts. So I'm really excited to see the effects of that. Anyway, I will go ahead and get this crankcase and crankshaft all boxed up and sent out first thing tomorrow morning. My goal now is to prepare as many other components of the bike as I can while the engine is gone. There's still lots to do. I got to get the airbox sorted out, rebuild some brakes, rebuild a carburetor, polish up some more parts. Plenty to do. I think in bike builds, it is important to showcase these things that happen. Most of my builds in the past have gone pretty smoothly, but things like this do happen. You feel like you're in a bind, you don't know what the next step forward is, but with a little persistence and sometimes the help of some experts, you get problems figured out, work through them, and end up with a badass bike, which is the plan. Engine is packaged up and ready to go. I'm optimistic that this is going to go smoothly. I'll have the engine back in no time, have this thing fully assembled and in the frame, hopefully in just a couple of weeks.